there was a video that was going around. I think you've seen it as well, of Beverly Hills after the election, Beverly Hills, a high school in Beverly Hills, where students were in the hallway celebrating T. Rump's election, and they had a giant T. Rump flag, a giant flag, and they were going through the Beverly Hills High School hallways celebrating, and and one security guard had a Trump hat and everything, and they were just celebrating. And I was thinking, for a teacher in that school, who understands what this election really was about, to see these young people in the hallways of Beverly Hills. You think California, LA County would not have this? 63% of this particular precinct, Beverly Hills, 63% voted for T. Rump. 63% voted for T. Rump in California, Beverly Hills. I was thinking, if I were in the classroom, because there's been a couple of semesters where I've had some questionable students that just, that I had to check. This climate though, and then they will probably set you up and videotape. Like, y'all gotta be careful. You educators out there, be careful. You talk about anything at all historic, or you try to engage these young people, which is so antithetical to what education should be. It should be a big place where we get to talk about things, right? I just feel very nervous about what is happening. And these are high school kids. I don't play with kids, by the way. I ain't playing with your kids. I ain't playing with I don't play with these children. Okay. I'm praying for my educators out there. You are so necessary and so important. I don't know what you're up against in these classrooms with these raggedy people who raise raggedy people, because you're not coming to school with a giant T. Rump flag unless your mama and daddy thought it was okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, this goes to the heart of what I have been saying for decades, which is that it is because I teach college that you will never hear me saying ridiculous things like, well, this generation coming up is more progressive than we were, and so I think we're going to be okay. That is a dominant discourse. That is what is most commonly said and done in the United States in order for people to let go of their own sense of responsibility for making things better right here, right now, regardless of what your age is. So anytime we sit back and say the next generation got us, we are relinquishing our own responsibility. And it has been teaching college for 20 years that has convinced me that you have to fight in every generation for the decency that you want to see in this violent ass country. I have always been clear about that, and it only becomes clearer. So now, it is absolutely
I've been guilty of saying that. So let me just say, I have been guilty of saying that. But the last two semesters,
because that's what the
last two semesters made me very nervous with the level of my mental health won't let me do this assignment. And I'm not saying you don't have mental health issues, but maybe journalism is not your bag. You know what I'm saying? Like, drop the class, because this class requires you to go out in the street and talk to people. So if you can't go out in the street and talk to people, then this ain't the class. You're going to fail. But the system now allows there to be protection for people. But that's the assignment, to go out in the street and talk to people. If you can't do it now. So this is the first time in 25 years that two students said they couldn't do the assignment that I gave them because of their mental health issue. I was like, yeah, nah.
Well, this is why this is important, Karen. What we always have to pay attention to is power dynamics, right? The power dynamics in this country will always be in operation. So if our analysis doesn't take that into account, we're in trouble. So with the Beverly Hills example that you gave, what we have to recognize is that there is a level of protection and okayness with this T. Rump sign that there wouldn't be for, I don't know, an LGBT rights sign or a Black humanity sign. Like, we have to remember that power dynamic is already always in place. So even when it comes to examples like what you're talking about, people talking about their mental health, so on, one of the things you have me remember about my own experience teaching is that very often, because our society is built the way it is, the students who feel most empowered to take advantage of those kinds of accommodations are usually the ones in the most privileged positions. Not always, but usually. So part of what we have to contend with is the layers of the different ways that we can be challenged, right? As Black women in the classroom, there is an expectation that we will be nurturing more than we will be rigorous. That is part of the dynamic we're always dealing with, right? So there's no question for me. I am definitely aware of how likely I am to be recorded in my classrooms because I talk about white mediocrity all the time. I talk about white villainy all the time. Like, I know that there is always a possibility for me to be targeted in that way. It definitely has happened more than once in my career. But at the end of the day, that's why I'm so invested in, number one, never trying to make an argument about the merit of people of color. I'm always going to emphasize how raggedy you can be if whiteness is covering you. That's number one, because I never want to be in that defensive posture. And I always want to keep the highlight, the light on the power structure, as you put it, of whiteness and how whiteness allows people to hold themselves to incredibly low standards and still have incredible success. So because I make that part of the conversation, I make the students' assumptions about me as a Black woman a part of the conversation. I put it all on the table so that it can't be that thing that we don't talk about and we don't analyze in the room. So critical thinking has to apply to the classroom setting itself. And if that can't protect me, then nothing will, Karen, because I'm not going to step back from calling out the violence that whiteness does when it is left unmarked.
You're made a certain kind of way, but I just imagine people, and this is why we got to stay ready so we ain't got to get ready, right? This is why we've been talking about the things we've been talking about the last 10 years, and especially financial freedom and all these other things, because you want to be able to, this is the only thing that will save you is your ability to be able to feed yourself in the midst of it, because they're coming or compromise your integrity and your soul in a space for the dollar, right? There are people that do it anyway. It's funny. We were talking about James Patterson on Friday and how, he was broke. I mean, the story was he was broke when Hollywood came a calling for Alex Cross. And to my word, I downloaded Along Came a Spider and realized that this iteration of Cross is Along Came the Spider. Oh, I mean, at least in the beginning, the framing of it. So I'm looking forward to all of this, subsequent seasons. I know season 2 has already been greenlit for the Aldous Hodges of the world and Cross on Amazon Prime. But I was listening to it, getting involved with his grandmother and the backstory and all of this. And I'm reminded, had I not known the backstory about James Patterson and how a woman who was falling on hard times, who owned a restaurant, moved into his family's home with her children, and he was basically raised in a home with this Black woman and fell in love with her family, the culture. And so when Hollywood came and said, hey, we're going to pay you 7 figures for this story, you just have to make one change. And he said, what is it? Alex Cross can't be Black. He has to be white. And he said, no. He said, no. He's 7 figures on the table. He said, no. And I thought about what it takes to say no to that kind of life-changing money. He said, I was broke. I was destitute when they came with that 7-figure amount to option this book. And I said no, because that's not who Alex Cross is. A Black man. Not just a Black man, a Black man who sees things inside of his head smarter than anybody else. I know Alex Cross. I created Alex Cross because I know him. You're not going to change him to a white man. And he was that person. But I was thinking, Dr. Caretha, a lot of Black people take that check. A lot of Black people would take that check. A lot of Black people would take that check because their soul is for sale. Your soul is not for sale. My soul is not for sale. So we have to move a little differently in our own lives and make sure when we say a thing, we mean a thing. We said the thing we said. Whatever the consequences are, y'all want to think you're going to snatch jobs or whatever, because that's how they, it's a control. Right now, I'm seeing it play out. If I'm in Beverly Hills High School and these cretins come running through with this kind of level of hate, because that's really, to me, what it represents, I'm not going to be quiet. Say something, but I understand people may not have the agency to do that, and I'm sad about that. But then what is agency? What does it mean to be free in a world such as this when you have to compromise your very being? What does that even mean? That you have to swallow this stuff?
You have me thinking about a couple different things. I mean, the first thing when you give that James Patterson example is that it's an important reminder that there have always been people who have stood up for what is right in the midst of every incentive not to. The United States is built on the incentive not to do what is good and decent, okay? And there have always been people who have stood up for what is good and decent in the midst of it. And I would tell you that that is part of what I've been thinking about so much since this election, because there were more than 40% in most demographics that voted for Kamala Harris. And it has been the easiest thing in the world to ignore more than 40% in most of those demographics, and instead to act as if everybody abandoned each other. But when we tell that narrative, what we do is we leave cisgender straight white men completely unexamined. Why? Because we don't have any expectations of them. And I would say that part of what this election has done for me is reminded me that goodness and decency is against the current, sure, but we can't have the strength to keep going against the current when we don't recognize the victories along the way, because all of those victories are going to be countered. So when we saw, white dudes for Harris who were saying, we know that white manhood has been defined as everything that Donald Trump stands for, the sexual predatoriness, all of the indecency. We know that that's what white maleness has been made into, and we do not accept that. We are going to proactively define it differently. Same thing happened with Black men, white women, Indian Americans, so on and so forth. So I just want us to notice that whenever our narrative goes to having a really high standard for people of color and no expectation for white people, and then we say, well, Latinos were voting against us and we can't trust them, those are some of the narratives that I want to call our attention to, because just like James Patterson represents the fact that there are always people who stand up, I want us to recognize that we have people standing up too. Of course, the non-voter is the real problem, but I need us to recognize that, because otherwise we can't build on the coalition building that has been happening. So when you talk about the Beverly Hills people, again, what I know is that there are teachers of every background who will stand in the midst of every incentive not to. And so we just need to remember that those people are out there and not always assume that they're not.
Oh no, I know that they're there. I just feel bad that they have to be there. I just feel bad that there are teachers that have to endure this in this time. I just feel bad that we are in a time that this is something you have to navigate, and principals may not even, because of the power dynamic of a Beverly Hills High School and all of those parents with those dollars, right, won't be able to discipline. You know what I'm saying? Zero. Well, they said we're going to, there should be no celebrations, but those children, so that they get suspended? No, they don't get suspended because mommy and daddy, they have money. Do you know what I'm saying? So you're sending all these kind of messages that I think undermine a civil society, which we don't have. So let's be honest about that. But we can't have civil communities. Yeah. We can create the communities that we want to have and set standards and parameters and build barriers around that kind of nonsense coming in. We can insulate and, do some things.
But I love that you said it that way, Karen, right? Because part of what you just highlighted is that when policies work the way they were designed to work, they're always going to give license to those in dominant identity categories to hold themselves to low standards. And they're going to have a higher standard for those who are not in those dominant groups. So to have the T-rump signs and to have that go along with the racism and sexism of the United States writ large, then that probably means that whatever the policies are in that school are going to protect those students. But if you had a gay rights sign, for example, wouldn't it be amazing how those same policies would all of a sudden result in disciplinary action? So correct. I love that you made it a policy issue, because that's part of what we're up against, right? What is most commonly said and done, the way our policies are written and interpreted, more importantly, interpreted, is what we're up against. And so I feel like that's the reason why what you're saying is so important about us encouraging people who are up against these odds, because they are absolutely up against the odds, just like I am, right, in the classroom. But we have to remember that those are, that we're not alone in doing this work, and that we're going to have to be strategic as it relates to the way the policy itself is applied unequally. And that's why we have to be able to call out the power structure that doesn't want to actually see itself doesn't want to be revealed as a power structure. It wants it to be like, oh, well, of course we wouldn't suspend them. Like that's the most natural thing in the world. When in fact, we should say, well, wait a second, why wouldn't we? What are some of the questions we can ask about what you're assuming, right? That never gets to be said. Like, anyway, I just offer the policy thing.
This nation has twisted itself into a pretzel of hypocrisy that's going to have a hard time unraveling. You know, we can't use the word retarded because it is offensive to people who are developmentally delayed, as if things can't be flame retardant, as if people cannot be developmentally delayed, but yet a person who makes fun of someone who is, and I've tweeted this, physically disabled gets elected. Get 70 plus million votes the first time and the second time after making fun of somebody. But we teach our children not to make fun of people, and we teach our children to watch their language around certain words because we don't want anyone to feel ostracized or set aside. But you elect somebody that defies all of that, right? So how do you make that make sense, people, you evangelical weirdos who voted for this? How do you hold a standard of Jesus is the standard, but this is what is going to lead us to the prompt? Like, none of it makes any sense. So I'm like, the hypocrisy is so thick, and it's globally people are watching like this. We look like a damn hillbilly ass, Appalachian nation. Like it's inbred. Like, it's so weird to me that we're here.
Slander of Appalachia.
Laura, I'm sorry. Look, see, listen, Dr. Mitchell, I'm thinking there are no rules anymore. I just want to test all of the bounds. 866-801-8255. I actually don't.